Hello, everybody. My name is Richard Budgell. I'm a Labrador Inuk. I am a assistant professor in the Department of Family Medicine. I've been at McGill for a little over a year. Welcome to Indigenous Awareness Weeks. Today's event is a kitchen table discussion on health and wellness within student cohort, the Indigenous student cohort at McGill. We're very honored to have 4 wonderful students or graduates with us today from a range of Indigenous backgrounds. Part of the concept of this kind of discussion is that we wanted to try to duplicate the kind of conversation that people would have around a family and friends kitchen table. That is to say, we're not doing formal presentations today. All of our guests will speak, but we haven't asked them to do a formal presentation. We want to have a discussion that will be open and free-flowing, where we can ask questions of each other and have the kind of discussion that many of us are used to from our family and friends settings in Indigenous communities and other communities, and have people talk about their experiences from a range of points in academic careers also. So myself and my honorable colleague, Professor McComber, are going to kind of try to co-moderate the discussion without exercising too much control, because we want it to be free-flowing and we want this to be enjoyable. And this is about students sharing with students also, so that there can be a kind of a peer learning and sharing going on here. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here, and a great pleasure for me to turn it over right now to my esteemed colleague, Professor McComber. Professor McComber.
Yes, Richard. Good afternoon, everybody. And first off, it's an honor to welcome you all here, also to the gathering, but also to welcome you to Haudenosaunee and Kanien'kehá:ka territory. McGill University sits on our territories. We welcome you, and when we give this welcome, in there is also the wish, if you will, that the ancestors and the spirits that watch over these territories have embraced you and take care of you while you're here, and also that while you're on our territory, whether it's for generations or you're just visiting, that you're welcome, and that you take care of this place as you take care of your own homelands and place, and we welcome you here. We bring our minds together when we gather as the people of the Longhouse and the Kanien'kehá:ka, just to put a focus. And so I'll do that in a quick English version here, that in bringing our minds, we greet each other in a good way, with positivity, with respect, and see that we are all coming together, not just our young guests who are here with us today, but also you folks in the audience are coming to have a sharing, to learn from each other, as Richard explained to you. And so we give appreciation to that we're able to do this, and that we also then acknowledge all the life in the circle of the universe, of which we're a part of that circle. And we acknowledge the gifts, the medicines, the teachings that all life forms have put in place and keep in place, that we're then able as human beings to have our human experience and to contribute back to respecting Mother Earth and to all the life, to taking care, remembering our ancestors and sky relations as well. And so it's with this spirit and intent that we open this gathering this evening, and welcome our audience here tonight, and now have an opportunity to welcome our guests with us. In these panel discussions, and we know when we're sitting in the forum that the moderators then introduce our guest speakers. But again, bringing this back into more of a community and Indigenous style, we introduce ourselves. So as we go through, we'll call the names up of our presenters, and you will each introduce yourself as you would like, and then you're going to share your story. I will give you a high sign at about a 10-minute mark. and then give you a second high sign, which is a cutoff at a 15-minute mark, so that everyone has a chance to present and that we also have that chance to have the conversations. So with that, we'll get ready to go. We drew straws earlier, and Alex Allard-Gray, you actually pointed up to the table and said, "I'll go." So welcome.
Well, Alex. So, well, you welcome, Sarwan. In Deluizi Aliquiosaca list Gutch Delewe, in Gitch Deluizi Claudia Gray, Aknoch Deluizi Pernell Wiseout, Akadalugoi McGill University, Ulana in Pisonal faculty. So I just introduced myself in my language. I said basically, good evening, everyone. My name is Alex. I'm from Listuguch Mi'kmaq territory, which is in the 7th district of Mi'kmaq territory, which we refer to as Gespeg or Lastland. I also introduced myself by my parents. So my mother, Claudia Gray, and my father, Pernell Wiseout. And I am not a student currently, but I did my bachelor's at McGill, specifically in sciences with a major in physiology. And now I work as something called the Outreach Administrator in an office called the Indigenous Health Professions Program at McGill University in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences. So on the topic of kind of, talking a little bit about my academic journey and, these instances of where my health and wellness, what was the state of my health and wellness at the time? I always like to bring it back to the first time that I had tried to go to university. For myself, I did my undergrad here at McGill, but it certainly wasn't an easy experience. I spent all of my young life living in Listuguch, which is a pretty small community. And we don't have a high school in our community, so we have to go across to the next province. It's pretty close. It's just a maybe 5-10 minute drive, but we have to go into the next town over to go to high school. And then from there, I had the opportunities of kind of getting engaged with different initiatives, particularly at McGill. There was a program that I got involved with called the Eagle Spirit High Performance Camp. It was organized by Wahéhshon Miller at the time that she was working at McGill. And from there, it was catering very much to Indigenous student athletes who had an interest in post-secondary education. A lot of us kind of just heard sports, so a lot of us signed up from my community and we wound up getting in. And it was there that I started to really build a relationship with kind of the community at McGill. We learned about resource centers like First People's House. I got an idea at the time of, what some of the programs entailed in doing like hands-on workshops. And it really made I think the McGill experience a lot more familiar. Like I felt familiar with the space and I felt like there were people there that I could look to for support. So I stuck around with that initiative while attending high school. And when the time came to start applying for post-secondary education, I made an application to McGill and I was able to get in. This was the first time, I had been away from home, so as I said in those earlier years. And, similar experience to everyone else. You hit 18, you decide to go to university, you leave your home for the first time. There's a context for Indigenous people where I find, we often feel very supported within our own communities. And when we leave that, it's very much like you're leaving a part of yourself behind. You have to rediscover, the community at the school or even the city that you might be going into. And I struggled with that. I basically told myself, I think unintentionally, that I kind of had to take McGill on by myself. And I really felt like that sometimes. I very quickly realized that, without the support of my family being there, being able to go into my community, be amongst, other Mi'kmaq people, I felt very alienated, I think, in that space. It's an experience that's pretty synonymous with a lot of other students as well. I'm sure people will open up about that, but there aren't many Indigenous people that occupy these spaces. And sometimes you could find yourself being, one of the only Indigenous people in a classroom. Some of them were 600, 700 students. And I didn't really know how to, I think, approach certain things. Like, I found a lot of the content was very different from how I had learned traditionally. And rather than ask for help, I think there was this weird moment where I was almost afraid to ask for help, or I felt like, I was ashamed to admit that I needed help. And there were a few other things going on at the time, but this ultimately culminated into me having to drop out of school. I didn't perform near well enough as I should have. And Miguel told me that I needed to basically cease my studies, either figure something out or at least take a year off. And I was crushing. I had at the time, because of the camp initiative, I thought, I had this idea that I wanted to go to med school, or at least finish my degree, go into maybe graduate studies. And I was kind of faced with this dilemma of looking at myself as a dropout. And I think maybe subconsciously, one of the smartest things that I had done in that instance was I went home. I went back to Allard-Gray. And I'm very fortunate at the fact that my mother is, she's an educator. She's been an educator her whole life. She got her degree actually practically the year before I did. She completed her bachelor's as well. But she's worked as a culture teacher in the school on our reserve. And she didn't let me sit down on my butt. She forced me to get out of bed. She forced me to come into the school to help her out, even though I might have been feeling down on myself at the time. And it was there that I think she recognized something in me that I had forgotten. And it was that, I really appreciated learning. I liked the idea of education, not just like learning myself, but also educating, the youth. And she gave me an opportunity to, sit down, work with the kids in our reserve. And it really sparked something in me. I went from this mentality that, okay, well, school's not for me. I'm not cut out for this. I just got to figure out something else to do. And I think it was there that, I started to reevaluate that a little bit more and regard myself as, no, I might have slipped up here, but like, it's not the end of the road. I just got to, find my stride, figure out some things. And, I was able to, work with the youth in the community quite often. And it was really, seeing the interest that I could spark in them on certain topics, especially sciences, that I think really like helped me get my drive back. So I applied for readmission to McGill and I was able to get in the year after. And it wasn't an easy transition, going back to university. I felt very much like I was headed back into the belly of the beast. But I did some things differently this time around. And this is really where, the narrative kind of switches. I realized that, I was doing the ideas I had about finishing my degree were not benefiting me, trying to take things on by yourself. Oftentimes, when we come from our communities, there's just that lived experience of, being amongst your people. There's a community kind of experience in that. We approach things not as individuals, but like as groups, as, entire communities. And I was lacking that. I really was. And so I started, accessing these resources I knew about. I started going to First People's House more. I started, asking for help, talking to the right people. And it was a slow process, but eventually I was able to find my stride. And I found, some of my best friends, were going through or feeling similar things that I was. And it reaffirmed me. It showed me that, like I felt more like I belonged, like, okay, I wasn't alone. I didn't feel, like an imposter in this sea of people who I'm going to get picked out at some point and just kind of kicked to the curb again. It made me recognize that, there was a hardship there. And the fact that I was able to find, other people who were, studying their respective degrees who were also experiencing similar things, it validated me. And so I was able to eventually find my stride. And one of the things that I actually learned to do a bit later in my degree was to take space as an Indigenous person and perspective in some classroom discussions. And that's something that I think is commonplace for a lot of Indigenous people who go to post-secondary education is, the experience of having to kind of step up to the plate and, put forward your perspective. And sometimes you might be the only Indigenous person in a room of people who, their points of view might be very different. And that can be a very stressful environment. But I had found that when I was able to incorporate that point of view in class, it helped me find a drive to want to persevere, to do well. It got me engaged in terms of, I started being more, I started becoming, what's the word here? That drive basically helped me to do better in class. It's as if, by using my identity in the classroom, it allowed me to, put myself into my work more so than just looking at things like, especially in science, it can be very hard to relate to said topics. Looking at it from an Indigenous perspective, can be hard. And that's something that, even now as a professional, I work with youth trying to look at science from an Indigenous perspective. Nobody has a one size fits all approach to it, but the more I did it, the more comfortable I became with it. And it only benefited me. And it also kind of reassured me that, there's place for those perspectives in the classroom, whether that's in your own work or in the discussions. And ultimately, all of these kind of resources combined in this newfound confidence in myself, I was able to finish my degree. And now with my work, what I like to do is I work with the Indigenous youth at different levels, mostly secondary and sometimes even at the CEGEP or college level in Quebec. And I try to be very honest to them about my experiences in school, and, just to affirm them that, the worries that they might be having, the hardships that they might be going through, they're affirmed, and other people go through that as well, but that shouldn't be a reason why you count yourself out from your education. There's place for us in these institutions. We have a place there, even though sometimes, they might be very colonial bodies. I often refer to McGill as colonialism incarnate, but the perspectives and the paradigms are definitely changing. And the more we occupy spaces in these institutions, the more community we build and the more supported we're going to feel. I'll end my spiel there.
Alex, thank you very much. Now Goa, Wahéhshon, for your sharing, and you raised some wonderful points for discussion that we're going to come back to for sure.
Thank you.
No. Wahéhshon, you are our next speaker. Sego, welcome.
What going to is the Wahéhshon. Wahéhshon you jets, Wagatahuni, you get the road, Gatnawagan, the Wageno. Miguel, the Westa Goa, Gadari Westa. So, greetings, everybody. My name is Wahéhshon. I'm from Kahnawake, I'm Wolf Clan. So I'm coming to you now from Kahnawake, where both my parents are from here. And I live here with my family. And so I'm happy to be here. I'm a mother of 3, and listening to Alex talk and everything, I'm going really far back in my mind about my whole educational journey and where my wellness and my growth kind of came together in there. And so I was a teen mom. And I was the first person actually in my family to go to CEGEP, and everyone was so proud of me. I was a strong student in high school. I went to elementary school here in Kahnawake, but I went to high school in a neighboring community, to Howard Billings. And so then I got pregnant in CEGEP, and I had to leave. And I also had this feeling while I was there, like, there wasn't very much support at the time. I went to Dawson College, and I was part of something called the Native Students Association that we made, when we're trying to get things going. And so I left CEGEP and I left the academic world for a while to be a mom. And I always wanted to go back. But what I did in that time, I always think about education and learning, and my journey starting actually at home. And I was born into a multi-generational family, so 5 living generations, many grandparents, great grandparents, aunties and uncles and cousins, and that's where my learning started. I was told a lot of stories growing up. My grandmother, we all have different kinds of reclaiming happening, and that kind of healing process. And my grandmother took us back to the longhouse when I was a kid. And so I got a longhouse education, like the traditional teachings. I got into activism. I did a lot of activism with my kids, bringing my kids to marches and all kinds of things. And after a while, I felt like I wasn't making a dent. And so I started thinking about school again, because I thought, let me go where the ideas are coming from that are fueling all of this politics. Let me go see what's this mindset, where it comes from. That's what I thought. I thought I was gonna come and kind of face a fight head on in a way where I could make a difference. And I started thinking that way. And before I came to school, before I came to university, I did already 1 year, that's adult language immersion program. So I did 2 years of full immersion in the language, and I raised my kids in immersion and everything. And so I felt like I put all those years in, I had a very strong foundation with my family at home, with the language and everything. And so I started at Concordia University, I think it was 2013, as a mature student. And I came in there feeling like I'm coming from a community, you know, and I felt like I'm coming in as the underdog. That's what in mind, that I'm going to face challenges other students don't face. And so I came in like ready. I went in, you know, I went to all the workshops, the writing workshops, all those different things they recommend. I took it all. And I tried in the first year or so to get my bearings. I was in the first People Studies program. And that was a kind of a challenge in itself, because a lot of the content that and the discussions in the classroom were very triggering and re-traumatizing. Sort of as these other ways like that, even if there were teachers, like Indigenous teachers, there's harm there that happens. And so I started to become active on campus. And I got together a group of students, and we started the first People Studies Member Association. So we started a student association for our program. And that took a lot of work. It took a lot of, you know, organizing on campus, working with, you know, with administration and pushing them. And it was a fight. And we wanted more Indigenous engagement on campus. And there was this larger movement happening there that I became a part of. And I was a student at the time. And I also helped start the Indigenous Student Council, because as Wahéhshon students, we didn't have a collective voice on the campus. So there were things going on that we didn't agree with. And we didn't have that collective kind of the power of a collective voice. So I helped to start up the Indigenous Student Council also. And I remember in those years, I mean, it was a lot of work. On top of being a mature student and a mom, and I'm commuting from the city back to Kahnawake, you know, I remember I had this conversation with the president of Concordia at the time. When we went in, we used a petition, a student petition, to get a meeting with him. And we went in there and we had a talk about all the things that were lacking, all the representation, that we weren't included, that we didn't have a voice. There was no place for Indigenous students, no space, all the tensions and things we were facing. And I said to him that, you know, I'm doing all of these things and I'm here as a student, and I can't just be here and just be a student, because my son is in high school and he's hot on my heels coming into this system, and I don't want him to come into this system the way that it is. And that was my motivation, was I knew the youth were coming behind me, my own son, you know. And I said, so it's not fair, and you know, that the administration of this place is off the hook. Why am I doing all of this work and you're off the hook? Why are we, the Indigenous students and the faculty? And there were also not a lot of non-natives rallying around us too, to support us to make this happen. So change has happened there. That took a long time on a lot of people. And I did my MA there in the individualized program, because there's no Indigenous Studies programs at the graduate level in all of Quebec. And so I built my own, and I did it in 2 years. And I did my master's on Indian day schools. And that's where I started to shift my focus, knowing that I wasn't an undergrad anymore, I was a grad, and helping foster other students, other Indigenous students, to kind of take over. Because it's not a movement if it's one person, and it became my name and my face and my voice everywhere. And I was able to recognize over time where I was being, you know, tokenized in certain circles and things. And I started saying no. So for the Indigenous Student Council, I wouldn't take a position in it. I just helped facilitate the whole thing, make it come into being, advise them, and other people stood up. And I had to let it go and let the movement go. So there were times where I was feeling burnout in those years. And I kept going. I dealt with the family things happen, right? And that's one of the things people don't understand when you come from a community where like your entire family lives here. You know everybody. You have generations of cousins and like you know them personally. So all those losses and challenges and the needs are multiplied. And so I navigated all of that while I navigated university. So the burnout was real. When I came into McGill, and now I'm currently at McGill in the Department of Integrated Studies and Education. I think it's my 8th straight year as a full-time university student now. I did all my degrees back to back. I came in, in all that time, what I didn't mention at Concordia, I think I was the first Indigenous valedictorian. I kept my grades, like I wanted a top average and I worked so hard and I felt like I had something to prove. And a lot of people doubted my abilities or my accomplishments because they said, well, you're Native and like it's a trendy thing and they want to give you, I earned everything I got. I earned every scholarship. I earned every award. So coming into McGill, I came in as a Tomlinson Fellow, and I'm currently a Vanier Scholar. I'm at the candidate level, PhD candidate level, ABD. And so what I learned, at this point coming in, I'm here just as a student now. I don't get heavily or overly involved in the politics and the organizing, and it's not because I don't care. It's because what I learned after all those years, that I put in, that I don't regret, when I was at Concordia, was that I could be doing a lot more at home. I could be doing a lot more for my community. So now I still do. I also work on top of being a full-time PhD student and a mom, but I work in the Kahnawake education system now, on language and education reform and reclamation, and all of the things I learned, that background, I'm bringing it home. I'm bringing my education home. I'm seeing the impact I can make. So my advice to people, to my students coming in to any kind of system like this, when doors open for us, they open for everybody. I open a door, I hope it's going to open doors for you, and I'll be a stepping stone. Protect your energy and protect yourself out here. And I wouldn't have made it in Concordia without the network that was there, like the Aboriginal Student Resource Center that's now, I think it's Wahéhshon, the center, and also by staying grounded in my family and my community to keep you humble, keep you grounded. I wouldn't have made it through all of that. So that would be my advice. And that's it. I think I'm out of time. So, Goa, Tony Iwanage.
Oh, Wahéhshon, Goa, for sharing your story, and also just knowing your family, knowing your mom, is kind of just appreciating hearing you talking, because having seen you growing up over the years too has just been an honor to be a part of. And I'm glad you mentioned the Vanier Scholar piece, and kudos, congratulations to you on that.
Oh.
And we'll be back to you and the other in a bit, because now we're going to invite Cody Martin to come up forward and razzle dazzle.
Oh boy. Well, we'll Kim Sewen in those Cody Martin, Akustigushlewi, in Kitchell was it Denise, Aknuchtel was it Michael, Wulage Kiskuk na Kahnawake. So with that, my name is Cody. I'm a third year candidate in the BSW program at McGill University. It's always a pleasure to partake in Alex's festivities. It's always a great pleasure when he requests my presence. So where to begin? I don't have an educational background. I have a grade 10 leavings. I left high school because education wasn't for me. And, a lot of the teachers and teachers' assistants throughout middle school and high school are probably rolling around in their graves and saying, look at Cody Martin inside post-secondary university, at a university level, conquering all these adversities. So with that being said, I got to visit the world. I got to explore Turtle Island and understand the fundamentals of our teachings and understanding those concepts. You know, living that oral history from a first person perspective. Lots of sacrifice and, you know, humbling experiences throughout my journey. But for the most part, I came back here to Kahnawake, you know, to explore my family roots on my father's side. You know, I have my grandmother and a real large family here, and lo and behold, I had met my partner, my wife. I became a young father. You know, we have 2 boys. She's in the education system. So she was really hard on me for like 10 years. You know, why don't you return back to school? You know, go back to school. You know, and I always doubted her and said, nah, you know, school's not for me because of my own experiences in it, because I was always told that I was never at the correct or provincial levels, federal levels in reading and math and everything else, right, to be suitable for the general society. You know, the robots fall right in line with everything else. You know, we cannot be unique and discover our own gifts and help in that fashion, right? So, so 2018, I finally told my wife, and she nearly had a heart attack. I said, you know what? Yes, dear, you're right. She's like, what? So I had returned to the local First Nations adult learning center here in the community. I had did the SSET high school leavings program within a 6-week time period. And I met Ben Gibo. You know, everybody is well acquainted with Ben. You know, Ben is one of the advocates for Indigenous people at McGill and throughout academia. Anyway, that's, you know, so he had heard me talking, and he's like, you know, why don't you come to university? Kind of looked at him and I laughed, you know, not disrespectfully, but, you know, I kind of laughed and said, you know, people like me don't end up in university. He's like, all right, give it a try. And he was persistent. He showed up with all the documents for admissions and everything else. And so I applied as a mature student. But I had to take prerequisite courses at Concordia just to prove that I was capable of functioning at a university level. So January 2019, I had enrolled into Concordia University in the First Peoples Studies, where I attended for 1 semester, not knowing the difference between a 200 and 300 and 400 level classes. I had enrolled into 2 highest 300 level classes at Concordia, where I had completed the semester top of the class, I guess. I'm not sure what that means, but I guess it's good. And later on, I received my acceptance into McGill. And for me, and you know, the health and wellness part of it is they demand so much, and it's not so much of the academic learning and performing in the readings and writings and assessments and everything else, right? It's the extra pressure that they put on Indigenous students to actually be in person, to be a human being inside that atmosphere. Because, you know, throughout history, university and places like that, there was no room for Indigenous people, right? So it was a challenge. It was a battle. It's still a battle. You know, there's a lot of people inside the academy that are not sure how to use their voice or to stand up to the academic bullies. You know, for myself, I don't like bullies, and I have no problem using my voice when the voice is needed, you know. And I think that's what had helped me get through the 2.5 years of my program was to challenge. I went toe to toe with the director of my program. I went toe to toe with the professors, provost, and everyone else, because the stuff that was being released and used and taught in the classrooms was only a one way of seeing. Albert Marshall's from Unamagia, he talks about the two eye seeing, and that helped me to utilize my lived experience and understanding coming from the community, because it's far too often the outside is looking inside our little glass dome, pinpointing the negative things, the corruptive things, the inequalities and poverty of Indigenous peoples, yada, yada, yada. But what are they doing to come in the community and help the people? So I had my challenges with that, and I remember a heated debate and argument because I didn't know what citation was, and I did a 10-page paper on inequalities and poverty, and apparently you have to cite people well knowing to prove your point, because your point of view and understanding of the struggles and everything else as an Indigenous person isn't validated. You have to have someone else knowing to prove your point. And well, that kind of didn't end well, and I failed the paper. But yeah, so it takes a total on your mental health and everything else, because you always have that lack of support and the doubt, and there wasn't much support other than my my family, my wife, but I persevered and I hung on, because there was a lot of stuff that I needed to prove. The journey is interesting, because I'm gonna have a degree at the end of the day, but where was I going with that? So, oh yeah, the whole atmosphere of being Indigenous and coming to McGill, right, where McGill is first class and superior, right? You have to have wealthy pockets and the finest wardrobe, and here I come with a plaid shirt and unbrushed hair and die-hard boots, and I was being questioned, what are you doing here? I had professors doubt me because I was taking high-level 304 level classes in my first year in my undergrad, but I'm still persevering and knocking these courses out of the park. But at the same time, social work, the part of my degree is to understand all these concepts that we talk about, right? Advocating and supporting the less fortunate minority groups of Canada, if you will. So within my journey and lived experience and understanding of these concepts, I kind of asked, well, what are you doing as a modern group of social workers to support Indigenous people? And nobody had an answer. So then there had started the solidarity of support for the Mi'kmaq people and Wet'suwet'en people. Solidarity letter from the School of Social Work had started, which led to bigger conversations with Casway, and another relationship had developed, and the talks became continent-wide between all the schools of social work within Canada, Turtle Island, so it has opened up many doors that I never knew existed, and which is great because a lot of that stuff comes back into the community where I work for an organization and I have an opportunity to work with high risk and vulnerable youths of the community, older population, and everybody else. And I share this this journey with them, and it inspires many. So thanks again for having me.
Whoops, my lips are flapping and nothing's coming out. Now I'll go with Cody for sharing. I picture the lumber. I remember the lumberjack with the plaid jacket and the big boots when we met at university and Sherbrooke to have a chat one day when early on you just had that frustration of feeling the spotlight from everyone. And how do you just push back? And what I heard you share today is just some of that incredible strength that's just always been naturally about you. So thanks for sharing that. And we'll be back after our next presenter, Tamara Hansen. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so Tamara Hansen. I'm Inuk from Nunavik Northwest Territories, so really far away. I'm currently in Montreal. I go to McGill right now. I'm doing my, it's complicated, so I'm doing my master's of applied science in nursing. So I'm in my final year, so I graduate this coming up spring, and I am in my mid-30s, and it's been like a long journey. And I said I would never do my master's, and here I am in my final year. So so I left Nunavik when I was 15, and I pursued my high school education in Edmonton, and not because the excuse me, because the healthcare or the school system isn't awesome there. It's just as good, but I knew that I wanted to pursue post-secondary education from a young age. So to ease the transition of going from a town of 3,000 people that is like 5 hours away from the largest center, I knew that I had to leave at a young age. So I begged my mom when I was 14 to leave, and she said, no, you're too young. And then I asked again when I was 15, and she finally said yes. So I left, and I stayed in my private school that had dorms. So I moved right into like the dorm university lifestyle right away. And it's a university prep school that I went to. So it really transitions you from being a high school student to university very quickly. There's no bells. You pay for you pay for everything. You pay for your books. You pay for everything. It's just it was a big sacrifice that my parents made, and I'm grateful because I definitely went into the post-secondary much easier than I think to some of my colleagues that left Nunavik later in life. So I'm grateful for that. So I graduated in Edmonton, and right away I attended university at 17 years old. And I am like, probably like every other 17-year-old, no idea what they're doing, living on my own at the first time. Again, because I had to leave home. I didn't have the luxurious lifestyle of going to my mom's and my dad's every weekend and having home cooked food and stuff. So it was a big transition regardless. And my first year, I was put on academic probation. I went to Concordia University of Edmonton. It's no affiliation to the Concordia here. It's a small university in Edmonton. But the first year was a learning curve. It was challenging. I think that I underestimated the amount of work and effort that was required. Anyway, so academic probation, I was put on, and they were watching every single move of mine, every single grade that I got. I had to beg professors to give me passing grades and stuff like that. So it was a challenging year. And then after that, my marks increased a little bit, but I was still kind of like on the rocky road. So I went into what I thought was a Bachelor of Science. And 2 years into my degree, I actually had to make a choice of whether it was going to be like molecular biology or just life sciences. And at the time, my long-term goal was to go to med school. Just, a young, innocent student, had no idea what she was doing with her life. And so I choose molecular biology, which I wouldn't recommend unless that's what you're really into. It was really hard. I didn't know what I was doing. Didn't have like the advice from other people to tell me what it was. I didn't have the parental knowledge from my family to tell me, you know, maybe you should switch. I was committed. It was money. It was effort. You're in it now. You finish it. So that's what I did. So I rode out for I think it took me 5 years to finish my degree, but I finished it, and then I didn't have the marks to get into med school, of course. So I sat around Edmonton for a bit, didn't know what was going on, had my degree. So I went back home and just kind of had some odd jobs. I worked for the federal government for a bit. I worked for my land claim for a bit, doing some of the research. Anything that research happens in the region kind of passes through our land claim and gets approved from us if it's happening in the area. So I did that, and it was an excellent position, but it also made me realize that I didn't want to be stuck in an office. And so again, I went back to like wanting to be in the healthcare system, because growing up in a small town, especially one that's so remote, and probably here everybody might, it might like resonate with them, is that you have transient people. So in the healthcare system, especially, you have people coming in, don't know about your history, don't know about the town, don't know about the culture, don't know about anything of the people. They provide you healthcare and then they leave, and then they're like, see you later. And so there's no continuity of care with that. So I knew that I wanted to be in the healthcare system because I've seen that happen too often. I just didn't really know where I like fit in. So again, I was like, I'm going back to med school. So I reapplied I went to the University of Alberta, and I was going to do my arts degree 2 years. And I was going to get a high enough grade to apply to med school. This is what I was going to do. I did 1 year of arts and realized that arts is too gray for me. I'm a white or black kind of gal. It just didn't work out. So 1 year later, I dropped out of that. I reoriented my life again, figuring out where I was going to go. And that's when I decided to go to SAIT in Alberta. It's in Calgary, and it's a tech program. And I did my my medical lab assistant program. It's a 6-month course. It's just a diploma, but it got me my foot into the door of healthcare. And I knew I would be in a hospital, and I knew that I would be figuring out my placement. So what do nurses do? What do doctors do? That kind of stuff. So in my practicum, I got a job offer on my first week, and I moved to Grand Prairie, and I worked in Grand Prairie at the hospital there for about 5 years, and I loved it. And it gave me my passions. It gave me my excitement. It gave me, you're helping other people. You're passionate, and it's especially in like the trauma and emergency room. It makes you just feel alive to help other people in times of need. So I knew that somehow I fit into there, but I didn't want the responsibilities of being a physician. So where did I fit in? So that's when I decided I'm going to go and be a nurse. Well, in your like late 20s, and you're trying to figure out like your life and everything like that, it's not as easy. I didn't have the prerequisites. I didn't have, people weren't allowing me. I didn't have the grades anymore to get into a bachelor's degree. To be quite frank, I didn't get into the bachelor's program in a lot of places. I didn't have the marks, and I'm in my mid-30s at this point, and I did online education for about 1.5 years in Cold Lake in Alberta. My partner's in the military, so we move around quite frequently, and I every night would be sitting on my computer struggling to do physiology online. It's hard. You have life going on, you have bills to pay and everything. It was a struggle. And I finally did all of my prerequisites, and I applied. And then I was going to go to the University of Alberta into their after degree. I had my life set out like this. And then the military said, you're moving to Montreal. And I was like thrown for a loop. And so when we moved here, I was shortlisted for my program. I didn't get into the undergrad. They denied me. And I was waitlisted. And so every week I would send the email, Hi, do you have space for me yet? Hi, do you have space for me at McGill yet? Hi, do you have space for me? And I just refused to take no for an answer. I just said, I need to get into this program because I worked too hard for them to say no. And I just didn't take no. So then I think I had moved here about 2 weeks, and 2 weeks into living in Montreal, I got in. So I got into the master's program, and it's great. It's been a struggle, and especially with COVID and the healthcare system, but it's been very rewarding. And it's interesting because I went to First People's House my first year, and no other university that I had ever attended, Concordia University of Edmonton, had anything like that. So it was really refreshing, comforting, and things like that to have that support here. And it's been challenging, but rewarding and worth it, in my opinion. So I'm grateful for my chaotic journey through the healthcare system and through the education system. But I feel like I finally I see the finish line, and I can't wait to reach that point, and I'm looking forward to it.
Nyalagoa, thank you so much, Tamara. Wow, that's quite the journey, huh? Of a roller coaster, merry-go-round, all together, and through it, just lots of experiences that contribute to then bringing you to where you are today.
It worked out,
Awesome.
yeah, and I'm grateful.
Right on. Awesome. So much. Thank you. And so now we have we'll just fill up the coffee cups and just start telling here. The two old guys will then just kind of start to reflect a bit here. It's like, Richard, what do you think about this these wonderful young folk? Doesn't it make you want to go back to school?
As a matter of fact, I just did. I didn't mention that last week I started my doctoral program here at McGill in history, but we're not going to talk about my academic career because believe me, we do not have the time. I went to 3 different universities during my bachelor's degree, and I ended up graduating from the same one that I had started at, but there were 2 in between. So I graduated from Memorial University in Newfoundland. I just find this group of people so wonderful, and so much teaching going on. They are teaching us. They're certainly teaching me. I'm learning from your experiences, which is the point of this. I'm interested to see some commonality of themes coming out, because a number of you have talked about alienation, feeling alone, feeling not quite as well supported as you might have liked to have been, and then making reference to, a number of you made reference to First People's House, which I think is such an institution at McGill, and it needs to be strengthened and expanded, and even have, I think, a broader function and purpose, and be reaching more students. But I'm curious about what any of you would say about building community, because we all come from our communities of origin that are, for a number of us, quite far away from where we now find ourselves. I'm curious about what you'd have to say about how do you build community in an institution like McGill that has its colonial history. How do you build Indigenous community here that then really counters that colonial history, and starts to provide people with a different vision of what this can be as an institution of higher learning? So I'd love to hear any of your opinions about that kind of question.
I don't mind taking a stab at that one first. Something that for me that really made McGill feel more like a community for myself, and also people I went to school with, was a lot of what First People's House puts on. Yes, it is very much a home away from home by itself. Everybody here and everybody who's ever accessed First People's House definitely can attest to that. but they put a lot of effort into making the campus space feel a little bit more, familiar, like home. One of the big things that, I would look forward to year after year is the McGill Powwow, which was organized by First People's House. And I think the special thing about that is that, often, as Indigenous people in an institution like McGill, we can often feel like the small fishes. We could feel like we're very few, and there's a lot of work to changing that, to populating this space with more Indigenous people. But when you see something like a powwow front and center, right in square downtown, middle of campus, it's this large grand event, it gives you a chance, I think, especially for those who might be away from home, and if they practice powwow culture, to really, I think, see McGill in a different space, to see themselves reflected in the campus, to feel a sense of pride just at, hearing, the drum, seeing the dancers, sometimes the vendors, sometimes even just eating food that is more akin to, what you have when where you come from, traditional or not. It helps, I think, make the environment and the whole experience a lot more familiar. And then kind of to add to that a little bit too, in terms of community, I kind of got my McGill experience, or my McGill experience started when I was really young. I was about 14 years old when I first, learned about McGill first off, but had the chance to come here. And it was not only just by myself, or I wasn't in just a general McGill program. This was an initiative that, I'm very grateful that the office I work with, we now basically coordinate the Eagle Spirit camp in a different form. But when I was young, I was able to experience McGill with other Indigenous people, but it was facilitated by Indigenous people. We could see ourselves being reflected at the many levels. And this is something that, we try to incorporate now, so that the youth get an idea of, what the space looks like, but they understand without it having to be specified to them that they belong here. There are people at multiple levels that, can reflect, from their experiences. And that makes the whole process a lot more confirming.
Thank you, Alex. It's really interesting. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll go for that, because my experience is kind of a little different than Alex's, because my first experience in the First People's House was kind of odd, because first of all, I'm big, brown, and scary looking, but I'm the most approachable individual ever. But it was different, because I was Billy Madison. And if Adam Sandler in the movie Billy Madison, I was Billy Madison. I was Adam Sandler, because everyone in the First People's House was way younger, and here I am thinking about, wow, these guys are going out having a grand old time in Montreal, and I gotta go home and eat supper with my wife and kids. So the mentality and the comfort level of being welcomed into a safe place or an Indigenous place was kind of awkward. So that's the First People's House, and making community with Indigenous people across the McGill community, for me, is kind of dangerous, because it's the same mentality that we as community members use against community members, and what I'm talking about is that the first thing that comes to mind is, well, I'm more Indian than you. Within my first year of university experience was a Métis individual had said, well, you're status Indian and you get a free ride. I have to apply for grants and everything else, and my education's not paid for. So there's, that mentality of, you're better and I'm, not as great. And so it's dangerous, to use that terminology within post-secondary, because, in my own personal opinion, I think post-secondary and universities in general is a safe haven for individuals to proclaim self-identity as an Indigenous person, and it's very discouraging, especially when it comes to awards or any kind of grants or bursaries. It's vibrant, it's open to the public eye, where non-Indigenous people are proclaiming Indigenous status and receiving multiple grants and whatnot. And here we are struggling with the colonial impacts of unresolved trauma and everything else, and trying to be recognized in this big institution, right? And here we are back on the bottom of the totem pole struggling. So I'll leave that there.
Thank you, Cody.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective to bring into it as well, because in these kind of panels, we want to hear the stories going wide, because we have to look at all sides of it, the experiences. So the two perspectives coming together is awesome, for giving us food for thought when we're looking at the picture of working into making McGill our home. Generally when we go to school, whether it's elementary, high school, and post-secondary, it becomes that nest, it becomes that home. And so you both bring things forward of things that we have to consider, and how that, so my curiosity is always then around how then you negotiate that, how you personally negotiate that. And when you come on the other side of that and you look back in the mirror, who do you see? Who do you see from that part of the living in the university family? Someone want to?
Most of the time, I feel like just a student. I feel like a nursing student. I don't think that there's a special title or anything like that comes with my experience anyway, of just like most of the time a number, a student, somebody to file through the program and be proud of when they're finished. And especially with McGill, I find that in the healthcare system, let's just for example, there is a prestige that comes with it. So you're a graduate of McGill, and that in itself is like something that you're supposed to be so proud of and whatever. But it's I don't think, in my opinion, my program is the best there ever was. I don't think it's something I would go and recommend to all my colleagues to do. And it's interesting because they portray it like that you're going to be this amazing graduate and everyone's going to love you and want you because you graduated from McGill. And then I'm like, yeah, but I'm not sure I would say it and sell it that way. So at this point, I just feel like they're going to be happy to graduate me, get rid of me.
I doubt that. I'll challenge them.
It was very striking to me when I started working here, and I started working here during the pandemic. So, I have many colleagues that I have not met in person. And I've, guest lectured in other people's courses, and many students that I have not met in person. But one of the messages that I got very clearly was in the name of the university is actually McGill brackets Prestige University. Because I've heard that term prestige or prestigious more times than I ever have at any other point in my university career. Now I'm, embarking on being a student here. So, okay, fine. But, the university needs to kind of justify itself on its own merits as opposed to, this kind of reputational thing. I'm curious because this has come up in a number of your discussions as well. The extent to which you have felt that your Indigenous ways of knowing has been acknowledged by this prestigious institution, accepted by this institution in your experiences. And I'm being a little provocative here, but I'd be interested to hear from you about, have you felt that your ways of knowing and lived experience has been valued in your academic careers at McGill?
I can take a stab at that. Oh,
please go ahead.
Are we on? Okay, sorry. Oh, my apologies. Okay, I thought it was muted. Okay, I could take a stab at that. Kind of drawing from I'll answer this in two parts. I'll say kind of like how that process has been working at McGill, and that process when I was in my undergrad. Very much, I think, for the first few years, I was terrified to kind of like try to incorporate my Indigenous identity into it. For one, because when you talk about, I did sciences, and Tamara, you kind of mentioned it earlier. A lot of the way that Euro-Western kind of science goes is there's right and there's wrong, and things are very empirical because of that. You know, there's numbers, things are measured. There's never any, you know, things are rarely estimated, and things are interpreted usually in one way, and that's it. And that's the style of teaching that science has taken, you know, across education. You know, we all remember math in high school, biology, and so forth. You talk about your experience, and literally everybody has followed that similar model for the most part. And, you know, as Indigenous people, that's just not how we learn. That's not how we go about our business. We interpret things in a way that, you know, we include a lot of the stuff that we talk about as our own community. When we talk about our traditional foods, for example, when we talk about the environment, those are our relatives. And that perspective really permeates, you know, how we go about, you know, referring to them and interacting with them. And in science, especially in science, it could be very terrifying to try and bring that different way of thinking to the table. I found success with it in my last year, mainly when I was able to focus and use science in ways that, you know, on a project, if I had to do something with a community, I would tell myself, okay, how can I apply this topic to benefit the Indigenous community? And I found drive in that, and that really helped me, I think, to hone in and, you know, make it apparent that I had interest. I was fueled by that kind of way of thinking. And so but I was still adhering my thought process to, you know, the Euro-Western model. And so when I finished my studies, you know, I'm going into communities, I'm talking to Indigenous students, you know, in reserves, communities, wherever they may be. And I've met some individuals, you know, that throughout my work where they, you know, in a classroom setting or in their own work are, you know, really revolutionizing, you know, these topics. They're bringing Indigenous ways of thinking into the classroom, talking about incorporating it into curriculum, challenging institutions. There are a lot of people who are going about that. And for myself, you know, I definitely wanted to incorporate more of the things that I grew up with. You know, as I mentioned, my mother teaches culture in our community, but she always made sure, I think, for myself and my brother, that we were aware of where we come from, and we very much, you know, use the materials. We went and foraged a lot of the materials she used in the classroom. That was kind of our family activities together. But also, I had to do a lot of unlearning when I finished my studies. You know, because I wanted to incorporate this Indigenous way of thinking, sometimes they can contrast quite heavily with these Euro-Western perspectives. And it's incredibly difficult, I think, as Cody mentioned earlier, to incorporate Itawab or two-eyed seeing, especially in something like science. But there are ways of doing it. And there's no one way of, I think, applying that type of thinking, but something that I've been very proud of being able to, start to work towards is using science as a tool to tell stories. And when I mention that to some people, it kind of goes over their head, but I use science as a way to tell stories and to put that experiential learning into perspective. And that's something that I continue to learn, as I'm working in this position. But that's something that I would like to see kind of reflected, I think, at the university, is that there are different ways of interpreting these topics. And science might be, one of the last to incorporate those kind of identities. But I hope to see the classrooms start to be open to those perspectives.
You said unlearning. You said the unlearning, leaving. Can I get reactions from others around that? Have you experienced that as well? Did you kind of sit back and ponder? Oh yeah, I had to go through that self-inventory. Some comment about that?
I'll take a stab at it. And I kind of want to go back. I think it ties together the last couple of questions that you asked to kind of give a little bit of a story. So in my time when I was at Concordia, I felt isolated a lot. And it wasn't just I was really engaging in student politics, right? And with the administration. And So there's a certain, like, you have walls, I had walls up. I only recognized it later in retrospect. We're talking about health and wellness, that I was on the defensive all the time in every circle, even among other my students or the staff, because my walls were up. Because even in circles where it was supposed to be all self-identified Indigenous people, I didn't relate to a lot of them. Everyone experiences different levels of disconnections, and that's that history of colonialism and the different ways that it harmed us. But I didn't see anybody like me who came from community or the res, like in the staff. And I just always felt like an alien, even among people who were supposed to be my peers. So there were times when, you're doing all this kind of intellectual work and you're on the defensive a lot sometimes in those environments. And I'm involved in politics and all these things. I wanted to kind of escape, but I was on campus almost every day. And so when I wanted to get away from it all and just do something that was more like, the way I grew up learning, cooking with my grandmother or in the garden, I used to go hide in the people's potato. I would volunteer in the soup kitchen just so I could use my hands and be around food, and nobody talked any politics or anything. And I helped prepare the meal, the free meal we used to give out. And I didn't tell anybody that I was a people's potato volunteer, like that I was going there and doing that. That was one of the things I would do so I could use my hands and just clear my head and be around food, smell cooking, and it reminded me of, being a kid. And I'd hide in the greenhouse sometimes and have herbal tea. And that's what I used to do to like get away. In the summers, I wouldn't want to be on campus, and I'd try not to work, and I'd spend time in the garden. We go medicine picking, we do things. I was trying to find a balance. I was trying to like balance myself. And one of the things I could say coming into McGill is that we built this incredible network at Concordia, and I was part of, that I didn't really benefit from it in a way, like a support system. I helped create a support system. I had to leave it. And I came into McGill mourning that a little bit. All those people, all those years, all those relationships, still wanting to go visit and maintain them and everything, but starting new all over again. And McGill's vibe, I could tell me the energy was completely different. I had thought Concordia was so far behind in terms of like the room that made the progress in the room made, the space made for people. And then when I came into McGill, I mean, at Concordia, I had an entirely Indigenous committee from my MA. I had options. Different people knew where I was coming from, what I was trying to do. Like I do story work. I work with elders and community members about telling difficult stories that I lived, in my family and in my personal life. And they get it. They get what I'm trying to do, where I'm coming from. And it was beautiful. And it's a lot harder for me at McGill to do that. One of the reasons is because there isn't enough Indigenous staff and faculty, like, and the roles that like we create at Concordia, where there's someone there for curriculum, like Donna Goodleaf, and there's these different positions that we created to make change, and administration has to be on board, and there has to be administrative changes, because I question why, as a student, you're not attracting and retaining more Indigenous faculty and staff members, because I know many who are unhappy with the environment. I can feel that as a student, and I imagine other students coming in could feel that. I'm in a different place as a PhD student than an undergrad. I've learned quite well what I realized in retrospect, how to navigate that system, and I made it my own. I made my educational journey my own. I found my own way through it. Not everybody is like me. I'm worried about the ones who might struggle a little or might have a harder time, or, so that's what I want. I want to see at McGill to make to make the environment more inclusive and welcoming. It isn't just about attracting that Indigenous hire because that's like the trendy thing and that's the thing you got to do. And there's TRC calls. How do you retain those people? Why aren't you attracting and retaining Wahéhshon people? And not just the ones who, sometimes you have people trying to take advantage, self-identify and get a position. But, I'm lucky I have my supervisor, I'm kind of, I've had two over the time, but I have a supervisor who is she's from Listugush, and she knows the res and she knows what it's like when you're trying to keep speaking the language. And I love that. You know, I need that. I need someone who knows where I'm coming from, so I can do the work that I'm here to do. So that's what I want to see at McGill. I want to see more work at the administrative level, because I know I experienced it, I lived it. We should not be doing all the work and all the talking and all the whatever for the changes to happen. They got to change too. They got to do work. They got to change their system and the policies, and it's at every level. And there's some wonderful people too there that I think are ready. You know, I want to see it happen. So, you know, I'm encouraging the McGill community, you know, to do that, to see those changes. And I'm here and I'm part of it now, so I'm willing to make, you know, those contributions too. So, Tony, you want to get?
Oh, the Spitfire who was at Dawson and at Concordia and taking on the president and having those face-to-face conversations is still very much present with you, you know, and just the power behind it is very much appreciated as a faculty person too, that you know we live under that that responsibility. You know, I just look at it and say, well, this is just part of the responsibility, that this is where we are, this is where we're at, in a way, being trailblazers. Richard and I are trailblazers in family medicine, part-time assistant professors, not only without the benefit necessarily of having been immersed in academia, you know, and in the systems, and coming in and jumping in and bringing our bundles with us that come from our lived experiences, and doing the best that we can, and we put things on the table, and with our colleagues as well, among the other Indigenous faculty, we share this, and say that I look at it personally. My own thing is that we're trailblazers, and I'm listening to the 4 stories that you're telling. I said, here's these young trailblazers that go back to really even long time ago, you know, meaning in your youth, you know, 15 years old, saying, I want to go to Edmonton to school. You know, at 15 years old, I was I wanted to go to a Mets game. and you know, and it's wonderful hearing this, you sharing your bundles, which is your teachings and what you think and what you want to bring it forward, and that you're all these trailblazers that comes from these younger ages. Cody, you know, wrapping up at grade 10, and you all did the same thing of went to the system to a certain time and then stepped out of it, and you went home, or you walked the world, if you will, which is also you're on that personal journey, and then it brought you back around. It brought you back around to that. My question with that is, that experience that you went through, reflecting back on that, put that into your bundle that you carry with you today. What is a couple of the strengths that you have personally acquired from that particular journey? And I'd like to go around and each one of you to respond to that. What's the personal gifts that you now recognize about yourself, about having gone through that full circle in the system, walking away from the system with reflection, with doing other things, and then coming back in on fire? Alex, I'll go alphabetical. Alex, I'll pick on you first.
Yeah, I could try to take a stab at it. I think I mentioned earlier that idea of unlearning. And as much as I'm not a student currently, a lot of the work I do does revolve around education. I think doing a degree in physiology, now that I look back at it, was that probably the best thing I could have done? Probably not. But I did learn quite a bit from it. You know, I've always been interested in the human body, you know, the human experience, and physiology is a way to kind of understand that at, you know, a systems level. You know, how your heart interacts with your lungs, how, you know, your endocrine system works and all that. And I won't bore anybody with that kind of knowledge, but it gave me an appreciation, I think, for how the body works in ourselves as humans. And you know, when unlearning, I think I've kept a lot of those kind of things under wrap because, you know, I like the idea of being able to explain why, or, how things work in that kind of literal sense, but meshing that in with Indigenous knowledge. As I said, I was deathly afraid to mention anything, Indigenous based for the longest time in my studies. But now in my work, I'm given the freedom to be able to express myself in a way that I feel, students would benefit, with my outreach work. And I always am trying to think of ways on how I can take something mundane, like sciences for them, and make it a little bit more familiar to them, so that they can see themselves reflected in the topics. And I think I wouldn't be so adamant on trying to do that had I not experienced something as sterile as a bachelor's of science at McGill. There's no gray in it. My last name's Gray. Let's be cheesy, but like, it's there's a lack of that kind of creative element, and oftentimes that's why people don't particularly do well in the Indigenous community when it comes to sciences and math, is because there's no relation. There's no way that like Indigenous people can look at something like math, the way it's taught, and find themselves in it and see themselves reflected in it. Something like biology is a little different because, there's that universal experience, but there are ways of making it a little bit more personable. And I think that because of the experience of struggling through a bachelor's degree in science, I'm able to like look at those elements and find ways on asking how would I have appreciated this more if I was a young blood learning this. And it's culminated into things like I'll share this one thing and then I'll pass it on. I did a moose dissection in my community. The hunters during our season, they would set aside a set of lungs and a heart from their hunts, and just in and of itself, the moose dissection is very much like I drew from my experience, that I acquired in my science teachings. But the whole point of that activity was to make that relation between our four-legged cousins and ourselves, to show them that everything that I had taught them in a human kind of physiological model, about the heart and the lungs, and how the cardiovascular system works, how all that is also reflective in that moose that we were interacting with. And I wanted them to experience that, for one, because I wanted them to see that everything that they learn can be applied somewhere. There are ways of kind of taking these tools of science, even though they tell you it's not intended to be, interacted with in a way that isn't black or white, we can make them gray.
Right on. Cool. Thank you for that. Thanks. Cody.
Reflecting back, I guess that being on, the outer realm of this crazy society of, dominion, I think for me that having this opportunity to come into post-secondary with the lived experience and the knowledge that I'm grateful to carry and to share and pass on is also another way for me to reaffirm my beliefs, values, and customs that once these institutions deemed unnecessary or non-valid to be suitable as a Canadian citizen or to be suitable for Canadian society. And I think that's very, very important for the upcoming and newcoming generation or students that are thinking about post-secondary. Don't let professors diminish or undermine your abilities to critically think and observe and bring a different perspective in that classroom, because the black and white in the textbook is not necessarily correct or valid. And for me and my point, and especially within the social work,
Who froze?
oh, nobody froze.
I still see you, Cody.
Clean your glasses. But yeah, in the social work part aspect of it anyway, is that there's so many inaccurate information being told about Indigenous people, where I think that, it's not just my responsibility, but I feel that I have to contribute in that fashion to say, hey, look, we're far beyond what is written in the textbook about us, we have so much great potential. We look at the resilience in so many different communities, and within the last 150 years of Dominion, we finally have a foot in the door, and we're allowed in these institutions to show and to prove the capabilities of performing at a higher level of education. So I like that there.
Cody, thank you so much. Right on. Thank you. Tamara.
Okay, so after I graduated, I decided to take a step back from education and stuff like that, and just experience where I was going to fit into this world. And so I traveled a lot. So I went to Southeast Asia, I went to the United States, I went across Canada, and I had this new appreciation of the various cultures and what people value and what's important to them, whether it's like having a meal on the side of the street with a Vietnamese family or something like that. And it's just the appreciation of culture, I think, came from those years away from academia. And as well as when I went and worked for my land claim and allowing the research to filter through me, and making sure that people, they're going to come and take, information from your land. You also have to support us. So what are you going to give us in return? Or who are you going to support in the meantime? You can't just come and take for free. It's a sharing circle. So, you can't just take it, you have to give as well. So whether it's giving job opportunities or giving reimbursements to people, providing you with information and knowledge, it's valuable to people, and it's valuable to the people of the land, and it's valuable to the researchers. So I think it's really important, and putting that into the health perspective of being able to support people within your own region. So for example, having a healthcare system education program available to people in the smaller towns is huge. Being able to have a program, let's say for an example, a licensed practitioner or nurse in Inuvik, it's a big enough town to have people, whether it's 3 students or something like that, that they can go and do their 2-year diploma or program and then go start working in the hospitals. That is so valuable to go and bring the education to the people. And those are huge, substantial things that can make a difference in a community. And those time away from school and stuff like that brings those into perspective. So that was valuable for me.
Right on. Very nice. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Wahéhshon.
So the first thing in terms of strength and adding to my bundle was I learned through the whole process that I was wrong when I came in. The assumptions I made coming into post-secondary about us being underdogs and about us, having a place and all that. It was quite the opposite. I found that we have so much strength. We grew up I was financially poor, but rich in so many ways that I know a lot of other people are out there in the system are starving for those kind of relationships and connections and meaning. And so that's how I learned very quickly, how to navigate my way through everything, relying on that strong foundation. I also came in thinking, like I said in the beginning, I was going to find some kind of fight, and where are these ideas coming from, and being fueled, and knowing how powerful the academy is and all of that. But really the fight ended up being in me. All the issues and the questions that had to be addressed and confronted were in me. And I, went through profound changes, and especially came to a head as a grad student. I just kind of went with the current, and I ended up doing Indian day school research because in my first people studies classes, we talked a lot about residential schools. And I was like, what about Indian day school? I do have family members who went to residential school, but everybody went to day schools here in my community. So that's how I ended up digging into it as an undergrad, writing papers, having to do archival research. And then I ended up, I grew up hearing these stories and doing that research, sitting with elders and people I knew my whole life, including my grandmother, and them telling me their day school stories. What you end up getting when you sit with someone is a condensed life story, because then they're giving you also all these contexts of what's happening, and they're able to reflect back and say how that shaped their life. And I was blown away by the way the schools here affected them, who they became as people. I realized education is so very powerful. Schooling is so powerful too, has this effect on us. It could be positive or negative or both. And what ended up happening is I had to open up doing this research, doing this work. Also, I had to reciprocate. There's a reciprocation. You have to give. You can't just get. And I ended up recontextualizing families, things that I thought were those family cycles, either of violence or trauma and stuff. I recontextualized it, and I knew where it came from. And it came from the schools, and it came from that system, and it came from, it's like a colonial poison, and I did all this healing work. I had to do it to get my thesis done. And then it changed my life. It was the first time I was working on every level, like mentally, emotionally, spiritually at the same time. Everything clicked. It was working. I opened it up, and everything changed from there. So I was able, for the first time in my life, I had significant health problems a couple of years ago, and I was finally able, I lost 85 pounds naturally. Like the mental strength it took, the time it took for me to be able to say, I'm going to put my health first and take care of myself better. And I started thinking about my future and being here for my nieces and nephews and my children, my grandchildren, and stuff like that. So it was a profound change for me. I learned to value my family and my community and what we've been through and who we are in a much different way. Even those stories, growing up hearing those stories, those day school stories, now I know how powerful that was, that medicine that I thought when I was a kid, I was just making pies or baking or gardening with my grandmother and my aunties and uncles. And I see it in a whole different way, a whole other added level of appreciation. And so it'll change you. It will change you to go to school, any ed system. Schooling wasn't our way. It'll change you. So it'll be up to you how it changes you, what you do with it, how you grow, how you use it. And so now I'm using mine at home in my community. I'm using education. I'm in a whole circle of Ganyankahaga women who are grad students, where, might be, a lot of our people don't know what research is. And we have all these research dollars and studies if you want to come in. And I am part of, protecting the community, but building capacity here and using education to empower us. So it empowered me too. And I just love a lot of the people that I've crossed paths with too over all these years out there in the system. The opportunities for solidarity and that kind of learning too were really powerful and affected me. So I'm thankful and I'm grateful, and I don't regret anything about this path. And I'm going to keep going. And who knows after the PhD what will be. But that's it. So tukni wakti des.
Nyako. Well, the four of you, your statements there, it brings such a wonderful whole story together because it four different perspectives about it. But I think that Wahéhshon, your last words there just kind of bring it together, and there was eyes looking and smiles and nods from your colleagues here, from all of us here, and hopefully at the audience. We're over our time, so yeah, Indian time, taking it and rocking it. Richard, just a final comment or reflection from you, and as we wrap it up.
My final comment would be, what wise people you all are. What wise people, and how inspiring. It's an honor to be with you. You're wise people of younger generations. So it's an honor and a pleasure to have been with you. I'd say in our language, nakomik, thank you very much. So glad that you were able to spend time with us today, and let's keep it going. We are not alone here, and let's not allow ourselves to forget that we are not alone here, and we can call on each other and provide support to each other. So thank you all so much.